Newcastle can't go under the radar. They might want to spin you a yarn that they're not going to spend any money, and I think that's already come out through the press that Newcastle's budget for next year is 60 million quid. Welcome to this week's edition of One-to-One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and equally as important to leave your questions in the comment section below. But let's get on with this week's show. Marking referees, and it depends which part of refereeing you're marking. Are you marking the VAR interjections? Are you marking the on-the-pitch stuff? Are you marking the outcomes from the decisions they've got right, wrong? I think that on the whole, referees haven't done that bad a job. I think 3, Francesca, if that's what you're advancing, I think that's a bit low. I think it's probably in the 6 and 7 levels. But you don't want referees to be at 6 and 7. That's like looking at the average player performing on a weekday, on a weekly basis, going that every player is a 6 and 7, but you want 9s. So how do you get referees from the 7 that I would give them and the 3 that you would give them to the 9 they need to be at, which is constant excellence? And I think it's a combination of personality on the pitch, help with understanding laws, and by that I mean that there needs to be some subjectivity. Myself and Martin Keown were arguing on a different show about objective on the pitch evaluation and subjective off the pitch VAR. And until you get a straight line between VAR and the on the pitch stuff, you're still going to have these problems. But I think on the whole, the refereeing standard is nowhere near as bad as we'd like to say at times that it is. I think if you look at a case of 9 times out of 10, referees will get it right 9 times out of 10, so that can't possibly be a 3. I think I'm more realistic at a 7. If Leeds go down, it's an unadulterated disaster for that football club and a complete waste of time. They've lost a season, they've probably bounced back next year. I think it's a combination of people's faults. You have to look at Bielsa. Bielsa, despite the fact is an incredibly good coach and dragged them alongside the ownership out of the wilderness that they've been in for 16 years and put them back in the Premier League. And you have to give credit for that. But you also have to say that going down with this group of players, albeit injuries, but all clubs have had injuries, buying decisions like Dan James that have just been a flop. He's not a £30 million footballer, full stop. And he hasn't played like one at Leeds United. And even when you get to the business end of the season, when you need these players to have some sort of thinking, Luke Ayling and Dan James have not been at that particular time the most useful to their clubs, albeit Luke Ayling is a very good player and scored a wonderful game against Wolves the previous week or the week before that. I think it's a sum of all its parts. The players haven't done enough. The management from Bielsa was going the wrong direction. I think he was done. And I know that the Leeds fans, and I've got a lot of friends that are Leeds fans, think that he wasn't done. But it looked as if he was done. I'm not sure that the appointment of Jesse Marsch is the right one, and I'm not sure it would have been made if you didn't have American investors inside the football club. And I'm not sure that the right players and the right reaction to the circumstances was taken by the owner. I'm not sure your sporting director is the greatest. I see him having altercations in the stands when he'd be better served having altercations in the boardroom about players that they needed to have bought in January to help the cause. So I think tragically, it looks like it's going to be Leeds. And I think all the moving parts I've just described are complicit. What a waste. What a waste of time for a huge football club. No skin in the game, no dog in this fight. But one of the clubs that always put the hairs on the back of my neck up, always made me feel uncomfortable when my team was playing them, was Leeds United at Ellen Road. So what an opportunity missed to have gone up to the Premier League, to have taken it by storm, to have not built the prerequisite support mechanisms to overcome the adversity that either a team that's been run into the ground or a manager that's run his course, and to get relegated is such a waste for a club that could occupy such influence and precedence in the Premier League. So it's the sum of all its parts, the failings. Newcastle can't go under the radar. They might want to spin you a yarn that they're not going to spend any money, and I think that's already come out through the press that Newcastle's budget for next year is 60 million quid. Now, you can argue that they spent £93 million in the January transfer window, so £60 million in the summer is not a disrespectful or not a particularly large amount of money to back up the demands of a football club that's been bought to be successful. It hasn't been bought by these people of immense wealth to tread water. So, will they travel under the radar? I don't think they can. there is so much expectation of them. There is so much demanded of them by sections of the media, by their own fan base. The manager will have, I suspect, some understanding of the fact he's going to be supported. So I don't think it's possible for Newcastle, like I keep saying, to travel under the radar. Of course, their actions will determine whether they travel under the radar, because if they turn out to not be free spending, Premier League busting Newcastle United, then they will, by their very nature of their actions, suppress the expectation but put them beneath the radar. But that's not what they're here for. These guys that have got this amount of money, that buying a football club for £300 million falls out of their pockets on the way to the game, are here to build an influential football club, to perpetuate whatever influence they want by owning this club. And the way to do that is to have a successful club. And the way that you have a successful club is you spend lots of money. So they won't be travelling under any radar. They won't be a secret, and everyone will see them coming. They might have to pay premiums whilst they build this legacy that eventually Newcastle are going to either thrive on or fall underneath the expectation level of the owners. But we'll see. But there'll be no radars that they'll fall beneath. It's an interesting conundrum to look at these three clubs and see who would have more success, because none of them are having particularly very much of it at this moment in time. It depends what success looks like. Each club has a different level of success. Manchester United's success was to dominate English football. So whatever they don't do, whatever they do which doesn't involve dominating English football, could be considered not successful. Tottenham is an interesting one, because they missed a huge opportunity in 2019. After losing the Champions League final, they had a chance to build. Now, whether they didn't build because they were building a stadium and they didn't want to spend money on players, or they didn't build because Daniel didn't fancy Pochettino anymore, thought he'd run his course, they didn't build. They've now got a live one in Conte, and he will expect support. They've now potentially, and we'll see over the next 72 or 96 hours, whenever it is that the season finishes, that they've got the Champions League spot, which will give them an extra 40-50 million quid. That may have been budgeted for, because believe me, Daniel Levy didn't bring Conte in, despite popular myth, not to be in the Champions League. He brought him here to be in the Champions League. But it might just give Tottenham an extra 50-60 million quid on top of what they may have spent to compete next year. Erik ten Hag is an unknown commodity. We don't know what's going to happen at Man United. If he's the real one, he can straighten this ship up in probably 3 or 4 transfer windows. And Arteta, well, I think he gets one more roll of the dice this season, and I think it's hard yards on him. I think he's doing okay. I think there's a young group of players that are, after last night's performance, getting castigated, and one of their senior players going out on television probably doesn't help that. But I think it's a real pick-em. If I were going to look at it and say what success is, Tottenham winning something during the next 5 years under Conte, if he's there that long, I think is likely to happen. And I think, given the fact that Tottenham haven't won anything for 14 years, then that would be the success that I'd be most expecting. I think Conte at Tottenham, because I just think the other successes are all relative. United's success levels, like I've told you before, are very different to Tottenham's. So I'm going to say Conte and Tottenham if Conte stays. Well, Deontay Wilder has a very good chance of being champion again, because if Tyson Fury vacates the WBC belt, then Deontay Wilder is the #1 ranked WBC fighter. So he will have the first shot at that title. So that means Deontay Wilder could, in effect, win back the belts that he lost to Tyson Fury, or had taken away from him by Tyson Fury, by fighting Joe Joyce or Joseph Parker. Now, you tell me, do you think Deontay Wilder can beat Joe Joyce or Joseph Parker? I don't know. I think it depends what kind of Deontay Wilder you've got left. He was bashed into the next life in 3 fights by Tyson Fury. Yes, he knocked him down and he's got a big punch, but as a fighter, he was dismantled by Tyson Fury. He was schooled, beaten up in the second fight, bashed up in the third, and lost the first. So what's left of Deontay Wilder might be put together like some clay and made into a world champion again if Tyson follows through on his threats of retiring. And I understand that, is it Mauricio Suleiman, the WBC president, is waiting for Tyson to come back from holiday, giving him latitude. No one's got to make a fight for a year. The mandatory challenger hasn't got to fight for a year for the WBC belt, so it's not a decision that has to happen now. But I don't think if he fights top-level fighters Deontay Wilder will win back this belt, and top level fighters probably means Alexander Usyk or Tyson Fury. It might mean Anthony Joshua, albeit I think Joshua gets beat by Deontay Wilder. But the question is, what's left of Wilder? No one's heard hide nor hair from him, particularly in the last year. So again, he's not going to improve, he's not going to get any better than what he is, and it depends who he fights. So if Tyson's gone and he's fighting Joe Joyce, or he's fighting Joseph Parker, who knows? Because of my view of certain players, and I've got a list which is being in front of you on the screen, my view would probably be Gerrard, because I think he's an outstanding player. I watched his development. I think he's unfortunate not to have won more things, but he chose to play for Liverpool and stay with Liverpool at a time when they weren't dominating English football. So he came away with Champions Leagues, but never Premier Leagues. Not bad, but not quite the haul he could have got for his talent. And I think he was just, at times, a unique player that drove Liverpool to heights that you didn't see in being delivered by other players. Lampard, because he just scored so many goals as a midfield player, and was such a gifted player and such an influential player, but he scored so many goals from the position that he occupied. So for me, he goes into my midfield insofar as I would ever select midfield. And Roy Keane, because I just think he was a leader. He was just a leader of men and a galvanizer of teams. And he might have come with his challenges, and he's a pantomime villain sometimes as a pundit now, like we can all be, if you have strong views. But I think if you were to go to the trenches, which is what part and parcel of the midfielder is, less so now because of the nature of contact in football. But Roy Keane as a demander and commander of respect, and also a very good footballer. So those are the three that I would choose over the ones that you're seeing on the screen. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of One-to-One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget to leave me your views on Leeds, Newcastle United and the standard of refereeing. To keep liking and subscribing, and of course leaving your questions in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you next week.